Hey, listen, today we're talking about the OXO Pour Over with water tank. And the question is, should you buy it? Find out here on Being Basics. Oh, hey there. Welcome to Being Basics with Bob and Michelle. Welcome to sunny Saugatuck, and welcome to the Elvis Lab. Hey, listen, today we're talking about the OXO Pour Over with a water tank?
Yep.
Yeah, with a water tank, right? And this is a little bit of a product review, or at least let's get Bob and Michelle's opinion kind of thing. But this request came in from Erica, somebody that does social media for us. She wanted us to take a look at this. And the funny thing about it is I bought this about a year ago, and I was going to do some comparisons on pour-overs, and this was going to be one of them, but then I decided not to do it. So it was great. I already had it. I could dig it out of the shelf. And I have had another OXO request just recently, too, and that's on the OXO grinder, so we'll do that in a future episode. But what we're going to do is execute on this pour-over device, and really there's three pieces to it. There's the actual pour-over part, and you know, looks a lot like a Kalita would.
Yeah, it really does.
Mm-hmm. They both have single holes in the bottom. They both have different versions of sort of ribbing that goes down the center, and a way to try to keep the filter off the bottom. This one's nice. It's got this handle on it. Of course, the Kalita, you know how the Germans are. I mean, they've built in a functional handle on the side, right? So
for the record, I can say that you can say that because you're half German.
I can. And then there's this water tank that goes on the top, and so you know you pour your water in here, and this water tank has holes on the bottom. But sort of the more interesting thing is it does have measuring on the side here in milliliters, and right there on ounces. But one of the conundrums that I face with that is there's a measuring device, but this is like using a measuring cup with a hole in it, right? I mean, the minute you start pouring in, stuff starts coming out. How are you going to... Anyway, I think you can see the dilemma.
It's more of a pass-through than a tank?
Yeah, totally. And then there is a lid. And, you know, I'm always kind of funny about these things, the idea that somebody's giving you a lid to hold the heat in, which on the surface sounds pretty good, but it's not really that practical. But then, you know, I actually read the box on the side, and they're also suggesting that it's basically a saucer or a coaster, so you have some place to put this in the end, right? Okay, so, you know, I think we should make a cup of coffee with this and see what we think. In order to do that, you know, we're going to, in this case, go right into a cup, but we'll need water and coffee, and this mug here holds, you know, mugs are big. This holds about 400 milliliters of coffee, water. And for 400 milliliters, you know, our ratio is 6 grams per 100, and so we're going to dose out 24 grams of coffee. And let me go ahead and get that started. So, you know,
would it be sort of a standard pour-over grind?
Yeah. Standard pour-over. I did do it more like a V60, which is a little finer, right? So we're certainly under an auto drip on this. And on the Baratza, I've hit about the 15 mark on this one. And that seems like about what the flow rate should be. Although, and we might talk about this a little bit later, this kind of acts more like an auto drip. So sometimes I wonder that I shouldn't have gone with an auto drip grind. But if you were buying pre-ground coffee and you used it in here, I think it would be fine. I mean, never really think that pre-ground is the most ideal way to go, because when you grind fresh, it always tastes better. But sometimes we just don't have the luxury of having a grinder. So let me go ahead and tear this out. I should be able to tear this out.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep.
0. Okay. So, you know, we always weigh our coffee and we measure our water. And the reason we do that is if we're using the same coffee, if we always use the same amount of coffee exactly and use the same amount of water exactly, we'll never be disappointed in the morning about the cup of coffee we get, right? So whereas when you use volumetric measuring, it can be a little off, right? So and I'm going to measure off 24 grams here, but this first is going to be 12.2, right?
Right.
Now, if it was like the same, it should be 24.4 when I do the second one. And I don't know what I'm going to get here. So
Let's see.
24.5. So pretty close, right? But not exactly. And to get it to, well, we want 24. So we got to take away
a bean.
1, 2, 3.
23.9.
It's like I need to pick a smaller bean. 24, exactly. Okay. Do those 3 beans make a difference? Maybe you would say yes. Maybe you would say no. I think, you know, if you're only enjoying 1 cup of coffee a day, why not go ahead and make it perfect, right? So that's sort of the idea of all this fancy pants measuring with a scale and stuff like that. We do like to spray the coffee because sometimes when it comes out of the grinder, there's a lot of static right here, and spraying prevents that kind of static. We also like to turn on our grinder in advance and dump it in. But I'm not going to let us go through all the torture of listening to that grinder because
thankfully you like to grind coffee ahead of time.
I do.
Yes.
I always do, right? And it's still fresh, you know, and there's no static. You can see that there's nothing caught up here and there's nothing on the sides here. And boy, it smells super good. I need to make sure my kettle's getting hot here as we move along. So we're going to follow the sort of very traditional principles of preparing a pour over. And, you know, this, like I said, looks like the Melita almost. It's of a little bit more substance, but
it's nice that it has a wide enough base to sit on basically any kind of coffee cup.
For sure, but
yeah,
you know,
I see your point.
It's not that's not a hard technical thing to figure out at all. So the one thing that we always want to do when we do a pour over, and we have lots of pour overs. We'll put some of those pour overs up here. We're going to reference some of them as we go along. Is we need to get our filter in. This is using a standard Melita number 2. You can find that at the grocery store, no problem. You can see there's some crimping right here, and we always fold at the crimp to give rigidity and let this sit in the pocket very well. Just another one of those sort of like, let's be consistent kind of things. And as this heats up, the one thing I'm going to do, though, here is rinse the paper. And while I rinse, we're also going to basically heat up the pour-over device and heat up the cup, okay? And both those things are important. So rinsing gets away or sort of removes paper flavor. And preheating the cup makes sure that there's thermal stability throughout the brewing process, right? And so we would employ these particular techniques, whether we were using the OXO here, or you know, the Hario, the Chemex, the Melita, the Kalita, all this stuff would be exactly the same. And
or
so
even that cute little Purr Over behind you from a previous episode.
Yeah, the Purr Over, right? So, yeah, we loved the Purr Over, didn't we? Right?
We did.
But mostly from a design element kind of thing. Okay, so, you know, our paper's rinsed. I can tactically feel that this is warm now, and that this cup is warm as well. So I'm going to pour off this water into something. I'm not sure I've prepared myself very well. And I'm going to go back to the scale. And maybe you haven't seen us do a pour over before, but we're going to basically rack everything up that needs to go on it. Our water tank, 2. And our coffee. We need to get our coffee in here. And when you pour your coffee in, you want to just give it a little shake, and that's because you want the coffee bed to be level. Now at this point, we're going to tear this out, and what that means is we're going to take it down to 0, right?
Because you're going to measure the water, right?
I'm going to measure the water, right? And I can measure the water by measuring 400 milliliters straight into here and like just pouring in like this. But because 1 milliliter water equals 1 gram for water, we can also just measure it by weight, right? And so we already have a scale to measure our coffee. Why not use this particular method to do that, right? Okay, so I got to hit the hold button here. And if you'll notice, I'm not, usually I use my fellow kettle. I'm using a different kettle today. It's a much faster flow because I don't need to control the flow because essentially this is going to control the flow for us today. And it'll just take a little bit of agony out of the whole thing, right? Okay, so the first thing that we like to do in any pour over is to bloom the coffee. And we have 24 grams of coffee in. When we bloom, we would use about twice as much water by weight, so somewhere between 48 and 50 grams, and we'd let that sit for about 30 seconds, right? So all this is sort of important. We have our weight and a timer right here. I don't know if you guys can actually see that on camera or not.
I mean, I can come closer.
Yeah,
to
come
it.
close. I'm going to start the timer. And did it start? Yes. And I'm going to pour in somewhere between 48 and 50 grams and or
40, 50, 60.
I overshot it.
You overshot it.
All right. You were supposed to give me a little bit of signal there.
Humana.
Okay. It won't kill anything if you overshoot it. The general idea is you just want enough water to saturate those grounds, get them all wet, get them ready to get all those dissolvables out, right? It's sort of the pre-check on the whole thing. And then also to allow some gases to come off, right? When we roast coffee, both nitrogen and carbon get trapped in there. And when we bloom, those literally bubble off. And particularly the carbon, if you sort of drag the carbon through, am I into 30 seconds yet?
Oh, you are almost up to a minute.
And here's an issue, right? So, because this isn't done dripping yet, right? Now, I did put a little too much water in, so that's pretty reasonable. Now, one thing I want to show you, if you could come in close, because when you bloom, what you want to do is like get all the grounds wet and so on.
Doesn't look like they are though.
No, right here we have some dry grounds. So we have some grounds that never got any moisture and didn't have a chance to bloom. So maybe that's a flaw of the particular design here, right? I'm not saying that it is, but the sort of circumference here of this drip is very narrow in comparison to the bed as a whole, right? Now we use a device on, well, I'll cover that in a minute. So I'm way over on time. I'm going to zero it out. I'm going to stop it and zero it out again, because normally, including the bloom, we'd want to be about 3 minutes and 30 seconds to 4 minutes. So I'm just going to pick it up and say we're going to let this thing drip through for 30 seconds. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I need to get this number to 400, right? And I don't need any particular...
Shouldn't it be 424?
No.
Good for the coffee. Oh, no,
No,
we're
we
zeroed
it all out. Yeah, this is a common mistake, right?
Common mistake.
No, we're just measuring the water, right? So, and we don't have to have any style about this. I mean, we can go like this or like this. It doesn't really matter. We're not employing any technique with this. What am I at? 250. You see how it's hard to, to actually use those things as the measure?
Yeah, it wouldn't.
And we're trying to get to 4. It's getting close, getting closer. 494,
398,
4.
401.
Okay.
You got it.
All right. So now, if there's something nice about this OXO and this chamber is it takes a very low skill level at this point, right? It's going to let the water drip through, and you can see the rate that it's dripping through there.
Well, it's sort of like a non-electric drip coffee maker, right?
Right.
Put in your coffee, put in your water.
Totally.
Set it and forget it.
You're right, right. And so maybe, because this costs about $17, this whole kit here, and maybe $17 versus some other, auto drip maker, which would be a lot more. One of the ones we like is the Cuisinart for $99, but we also like the Mocha Master for like $350, right? So maybe at $17, that's really great, but keep in mind you're going to have to buy a kettle or maybe you can just use a pot on the stove. This is dumbed down enough that you can just pour the water in, and theoretically it will do the work for you. So what kind of time are we at? I never set the timer.
You never set the timer.
Boy, is that typical, right?
Well, we get carried away talking.
No, for sure. So it's dripping through nicely. If we were managing this pour over by ourselves, I'm just going to have you come in here for a second, we would actually want to have raised all this water and coffee up to very close to the top of the filter. That's never really happening here. And in a typical pour over, there is some dimension that is kind of like an immersion method. I mean, this is very much a percolation method. Water's running through, but when we stack water on top of it and let the ground soak in it a little bit and so on and so forth, that's pretty close to an immersion method. Okay, I do want to talk about, there are other devices, pour over devices you could use. Hario V60 is a favorite of mine. I like the little carafe that it comes with. I just want to remind you what it costs. That's $28, right? So to me, that's not a lot more than this, but this is a much better device, I think. The Chemex is like $44, but it's all glass and wood and leather and stuff like that. And for that, like not using plastics, you do pay a premium for that. And
it's also a classic design. We were watching a Mary Tyler Moore from the 70s.
Yeah, right.
She was using one that looks just like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're cool if you use one of those. There's no doubt about it, right? We have the Kalita. You can get 2 of these for $9, right? So you can literally be using one, put it in the dishwasher. The next day you can use another one and swap them out. I mean, that's just really not expensive. And then we always have the consideration of, I'm not really holding that very well, the Kalita, which is a flat bottom brewer, not so much a cone filter. But one of my favorites, of course, is the Clever, which does something about like what this is doing in the sense that it's kind of meant to be idiot-proof almost. But it does combine immersion and percolation a little more aggressively, but does provide a very consistent brew. And I forget what that does cost. I think this is about in the $26, $28 range also. Okay, so our brew is done. The bed is fairly flat. I'm kind of happy with that. The actual filter sort of collapsed a little bit. I don't know what that's about. But it did make a great cup of coffee. You can see it right there.
Yes.
And we like that. And so, you're making yourself a cup of coffee. It's a pretty easy to use method using the OXO here. Let me just try it for a moment. Yeah, so same. Michelle and I did one of these just before the show. And the one thing that we noted is it was a little over extracted. And I sort of lament that I didn't start the timer because it would have demonstrated that it took a little bit longer than 3 minutes to get where it needed to go. So the question is, is this a useful device? From a sort of distribution of the water funnel, right? This is not so good. It's more like an auto drip machine where there's just a little head and you're not really getting good spray action. We do like to use a product that's called the BIGGBY, often with any pour over. If you're looking to sort of keep things really simple and easy, the BIGGBY can provide that same kind of benefit. I'm not going to use this one to put it on. I'm going to use the Hario. And it has an inner and outer ring that you alternate in between. And so the spray sometimes goes in the center, sometimes goes on the outside. It has its own sort of restriction that is really just right on par for making a good extraction on a pour over with a very low skill set, right? So, so we have to decide, what we're going to do with this particular device, and that is, from a design perspective, just generally, I find it attractive. I'm not sure exactly what problem it solves, right? Because these hash marks here aren't really a true measuring device, and the spray head is not that adequate for a pour over. And you you could just use your kettle and pour right into here, because again, as I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of difference between this, and if you wanted to make the flow rate a little bit better, you could use something like a BIGGBY. That would be just as useful. So although the design is nice, and it's solid construction, easy to clean and everything like that, as a brewing device, I don't find it as effective as some other things in the marketplace. So my question to you, is this something that we keep? Is this something that we give away? Or is this something we crush because it's just useless to us on this earth?
Well, so this one's a conundrum for me because I don't dislike it enough to run over it with my car.
Okay, good. Right,
you
right.
know? I don't particularly want to keep it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to give it to anybody either. In fact, I would probably caution friends not to buy it. So maybe it goes to Goodwill.
No. Those aren't the choices. Right. I mean, if you keep it, all you really need to keep is this, right? But if all you're keeping is this, then we would recommend to get something else altogether. So what we could do is we could keep the bottom part and crush
it.
the top part, because there's nothing useful about the top part. It doesn't have a good spray head.
Yeah.
It's not a good measuring device.
Yeah.
You're not actually keeping the heat in or anything like that. I think we have a split decision here, and that is we're going to keep the pour over component and we're going to crush the top of it.
I'm looking forward to the episode we do when we run things over with our cars.
Oh no, we're going to run this over with our car. Okay, on that note, we're going to end with something a little happier, which is...
when you love the world
will love you right back. Hey, thanks for joining us. For future episodes, click the subscribe button. Bean Basics is brought to you by OneBigIslandInspace.com with 2 G's.